Hello everyone, and welcome to the 2020 season of the Collegiate Penetration Testing Competition. This is going to be our kickoff call for the regional events held third quarter 2020, October and November. So thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to this year of CPTC. So for our agenda today, we're going to go over the rules and the COVID-19 related changes for 2020. We'll talk about our schedule and deadlines. We'll talk about the logistics and connectivity and how you're going to access the environment for competing. We'll discuss kind of the pillar of CPTC and how we are going to handle in-character and out-of-character interactions. And then we'll go over some of the reporting requirements. Just for everyone's reference, this is a pre-recorded meeting, and we are using the same one across all regionals to keep this fair. So what you're hearing now is the same thing everyone else that is competing is going to see. So the voices behind this meeting, Lucas.
Hello everybody. This is Lucas Morris, and I, working with Tom, am one of the directors of CPTC, and we'll be taking you through some of our journey here over the next few days.
Yep, and same thing. This is Tom, and I'm also one of the CPTC directors, and together Lucas and I are kind of the two crazies at the top for making this all happen. So we affectionately refer to ourselves as insane, but we're happy to bring this to you, and hopefully you will learn from our experience making this competition exist. So first, let's talk about rules and some of the changes that we've had to implement this year due to the pandemic. So first and foremost, everything that we do for this event revolves around education and teaching. We want everyone who participates in CPTC to learn something as a result of it and be better because of it. This is as much a pen testing competition as a consulting competition, and we want to teach you how to work with clients and how to be better at that, because fundamentally, regardless of what you end up doing, whether it's pen testing, consulting, or other technical work, your customers are going to be who you have to make happy. We also want to teach real-world penetration testing skills. Some of the examples from last year would be how to pass the hash or how do you mitigate a DDoS attack. Many of these other skills that you would find doing pen testing or other security tasks are things that we want to teach you. And like everything, we're learning with you. So if a teaching opportunity comes up or we see something that we want to add to the event, we can and will add to the event in real time. And we don't even know necessarily what some of those changes might be, but they do happen and they keep us all on our toes. So let's talk a little bit about the rules and changes and clarifications that we've added for 2020. Obviously, things are very different than they were in 2019. We're not all going to be able to travel to our regional events and compete in person, but we still want to try to have some of the same experiences that you've had in the past. So we understand remote participation is something that's going to happen. Some of you may be at your universities and may be able to compete in the same space, and that's understandable. Some of you may be entirely working from home, like Lucas and I are. That is totally fine, and we are allowing remote participation for the team members. One thing that has not changed is unprofessional behavior is still unacceptable. This is a professional competition, and keeping everything professional is one of the most important aspects. In terms of what tools are allowed, you can use anything that's freely available and permitted for commercial use. So anything that requires a license or registration or is only for non-commercial use cannot be used. Lucas, do you have some examples that might be tools that we've seen that people have asked questions about in the past?
Sure. So some of the ones that we get questions a lot are some commercial cybersecurity tools such as Tenable Nessus or Qualys. Can we use those? Additionally, we also often hear about things like VMware, some of the clients and other things that are behind a login portal and require a sign up. And in both cases, or all of these cases, we actually do consider these tools out of scope for the competition. As a reminder, they must be publicly available and must be available for that non-commercial or for commercial use. And so because of that, that does limit some of the tools, but for the most part, our teams do stick with a lot of open source tools that are available, and certainly all open source tools are included and allowed for the competition.
Thank you. And the reason that we have this requirement is because if you're working professionally, you can't use a non-commercial tool for a service or pen test that you're getting paid for. So we want to respect those licensing agreements that many vendors have for their products. Finally, this is an addition that we added in 2019 and will continue to allow staging, but that can only be done on a publicly available CPTC repo that we will allow your team to use. So reach out to us, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to reach out to us in some of the later slides. But if your team would like to get that set up on GitHub, let us know, and we will provide that. And any team that has access to that, as well as anyone else in the world, is able to use that information. So obviously keep that in mind, but we'd love to see the tools that everyone creates and shares with the rest of the world. Finally, these rules are going to be consistent across all of the CPTC regional events. And to reference the rules as well as the pandemic addendum that we've created, see the URL listed there. So Lucas, I think you can go ahead and take some of the schedules and deadlines, and we will keep moving forward.
Sure, absolutely. So when we look at what's going to be happening before the region, the dates, of course, are going to be flexible because each region will be operating on different weekends throughout the months of October and November. However, the week before your regional, once you're viewing this video, which will probably be the weekend before, potentially the Monday before, you have a few days to attempt to connect to the virtual desktop infrastructure that we are going to provide you. Now, we are going to spin this up. We will give you the connectivity for a limited number of systems, but please do be aware we are going to turn this off. So any preparations that you make on these systems will be wiped out and will not be available. So please don't spend any time doing that. Additionally, we are going to look for you to submit information about your teams. And some of this will be just general information and contact information. But some additional pieces here are some controls that we've put in place because of the pandemic, such as the IP address that you'll be coming from and some information around your team. Again, we'll be asking for you to submit this most likely on Thursday, but we may also leave some flexibility in that time frame for you as well. Now, Friday, get some sleep, get prepared, because Saturday is when the competition begins. And it begins at 8 a.m. competition time. So for each region or each weekend, we may have up to 2 regions that are going at the same time. And as an example, one weekend based on our schedule, we are going to have some teams from the Eastern United States as well as the Central United States time zones. Now, because of that, we will be selecting one time zone that will be the competition time that everything may run over. So just please note that you may be plus or minus an hour here or there as these go through, but the times will be consistent. So every region will have the exact same amount of time throughout all of the weekends that this is running. So the competition begins at 8 a.m. competition time, and your access to the environment will end at 5:30. You'll have until 1 a.m. the next morning on Sundays, so a few hours to write your reports and put those in the Dropbox that we'll mention here in a little while. Our graders will then start very early Saturday or Sunday morning, and we'll announce winners for each of the regions at 5 p.m. And we'll announce at-large winners for the other additional spots that we have once all of the regions have been concluded in late to mid-November. So to give you a little more detail of what the Saturday itself is going to look like, at 8 a.m., again, competition time, we're asking the teams to all assemble in an online meeting. And we'll have more information from you on what that connectivity looks like as we get closer to the region. At 8:20 a.m., we will be distributing your access information. This will be the credentials that you'll use to get into your Google Drive and to access your virtual desktop infrastructure. At 8:30, access to the environment will open. At 5:30, access to the environment will close. So you have all of the time between 8:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. to perform the penetration test of the environment. And at 5:35, we'll have another similar briefing for you to talk about what the next steps are and give you some reminders around reporting and some of the things we're talking about today. Now, Sunday morning, We will be doing the written reports are due at 1 a.m. This is important because we will be using the timestamp on the drive and on the submission form for these. So I highly suggest that don't be late. Be a couple minutes early, because if you're late, there will be penalties applied. And then, as I mentioned before, 5 p.m. on Sunday, we will also do a remote Q&A, as well as release the winners and the names of the organizations and teams that are moving on to the finals.
And one comment I'll just share about the written reports is after you submit your report, just make sure you close your browser window or anything like that. Don't risk the fact that, maybe a timestamp might get modified, because we're going to use the timestamp in Google Drive for that modification time. And that'll just prevent there from being any questions about when you submitted the report.
It's a good comment, Tom.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the logistics of how you're going to be getting into this environment. There are going to be a few things that we are providing to you to make sure that everyone has an even amount of access to systems, to hardware, and to access throughout the competition in all of the regions. So first, you would be provided with a Google account, and this is going to have access to an email inbox and a team drive. Now, the email inbox may be a place where the client will reach out to you to communicate, so you're definitely going to want to have someone that pays attention to that. But additionally, if you have questions, that will be one of the venues that you can use to communicate with the client for any in-character questions that you have. Additionally, we are going to provide a shared drive. So this will be one where we will be having you drop your files and your reports and any deliverables that you're providing in. This is where we will be pulling things to grade, and this will be the authoritative source for all of those throughout. So please make sure that you do have access and that you see that inside the drive. We're going to be providing a virtual desktop infrastructure, very similar to the way we have in past years, with a few changes because of the pandemic. So each member of your team will be provided with a Windows and a Unix machine inside this VDI environment. So that will be 6 each, or 12 total. Access to these this year, in the past, while we may have provided SSH access to the Unix box, this year we are only providing remote desktop access into the virtual desktop environment and into the competition environment. But you will be able to SSH and VNC from your Windows system to the Unix box to use that system as well from the VDIs. And in general, all work must be performed within those VDI environments. We have had in the past some teams that have exfiltrated information outside of those in an attempt to use hardware that they had access to or hardware that they had locally back when we could do this in person. And those did result in penalties because we are fairly heavily monitoring all of that environment. So in general, what we want to make sure of is a reminder that you don't need access to any of this hardware. As an example, the passwords we use in the environment are either ones that you can easily crack on a CPU or ones that you will not be able to crack even with a large cluster of GPUs during the time we have in the single day of the competition. So you don't need the additional access. You don't need the extra hardware. It's not worth the risk trying to bring that in. Now, as we mentioned, we are making a few changes because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we all cannot be together in person for the regional competitions. So first, as I mentioned before, we are going to be asking your team captains to submit the IP address and physical location where you're going to be testing from. There will be ACLs in place to limit it so that VDI access is only through these ACL or through these IP addresses. And if they change, we do have a help desk that we'll mention here shortly and give you connection information for, so that if that changes, we'll get that resolved very quickly. We also will be assigning each competitor an individual VDI system on the Windows side, and we're asking that you not switch between team members because those changes will also be monitored and will result in some questions on our end. And then finally, during the reporting period of the competition, so this is after things end on Saturday at 5:30 p.m., you may access the Google Drive from your personal systems. So you may continue to use these to work on your report and your deliverables. There are a couple of things that are important to mention here, though, in that you are still responsible for protecting your client's information. And we have had teams, for those of you that were involved last year, may remember that several teams were actually found to be taking a copy of the entire Google Drive. And in many cases, that included client information, dumps of entire databases, things that we need to perform pen tests, but that would create a significant exposure at the client. And because of that, we did actually have to assess a penalty on the teams for taking large amounts of wholesale information. So please keep that in mind. You are responsible for protecting the client, even as you're working on your own systems.
And just to clarify one more time so that everyone's on the same page, between competition time 8 o'clock and 5:30, all of that access to Google Drive should only be done via the VDI, and you should not be accessing that from any other systems. After 5:30, when it's the reporting phase, until 1 o'clock a.m. on Sunday, that can be done via your personal machines, just so that there's no questions about when this distinction happens. With that discussion, we can shift a little bit into what we're doing to ensure integrity for the competition as this happens. The most important thing for everyone to keep in mind is all environment access is monitored. And if something happens or if we detect anomalous access, you'll hear from us. We don't want you to hear from us. Additionally, after the event, for every team that is advancing to the final competition in January, we will be performing an audit of activity that's done. And we want to review everything that teams did that are advancing and every form of access that occurs to look for potential rules violations. So once again, we don't want to find anything. So if there's anything that you run into or discover or think might be a problem, let us know. We would much rather hear from that from you as opposed to have to discover it ourselves and ask questions.
And Tom, one thing I would add here is that as a professional pen tester and as someone who does this on a regular basis, as we work with clients, there's a lot of times that we will notice something, either something that we've done or something that comes up. And certainly also within the auspices of CPTC, we also find that when you bring it to us, it's a very different response than if something happens after the fact. If you get into something accidentally or something happens, let the client know, and the response will be very different.
Absolutely. And this goes to both Lucas and I's professional experience. We've had to have conversations with clients before, and we speak from experience, and we want to bring that experience to you in this event. Now, finally, we want to ensure fairness across regions. We understand that there are some regions that are happening very early in October and some that are happening closer to the middle of November. And there is an opportunity that teams could disclose information that may benefit another team, and we don't want to see that. That will only impact or affect the likelihood of a team that competes earlier from having the same experience or the same opportunity to go to nationals because other teams may do better. So we ask that you limit public content or comments about the event through whatever means you use for that until after the finals in January of 2021. This will be discussed a little bit further when we talk about the non-disclosure agreement, but we want everyone to keep that in mind. We want to keep this fair for everyone that's competing, and we want your team to not have a disadvantage with another team that competes later. And next, if you have questions, we're here to be of help. So this year we have introduced a ticketing system on Freshdesk that you can sign up for and submit tickets with questions. There is also a public knowledge base, an FAQ, that has many of the questions that we've answered in the past already posted. So feel free to submit tickets with questions. And what we will do prior to the event is post answers to these publicly so that any team that asks a question should expect that knowledge to be shared with all other teams. So next, we'd like to transition a little bit to one of the things that makes CPTC special, how we do playing, and in-character interaction. So Lucas, let's have you talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we find to be very interesting about CPTC, and one of the things that we consistently get very good feedback on, is that we don't just have a technical component, right? There is interaction. And as I do my job day to day, week to week, year to year, one of the critical things that happens regularly is interacting with clients. And ultimately, we are there to provide technical expertise. But as we work with them, the things that we leave behind are certainly our report, potentially any presentations that we've done with them, and how they felt about working with us. And CPTC tries to take all of that into account as we move through this. Now, it is something that first-time competitors often have a little bit of a interesting reaction to, that we will have volunteers who will be playing characters that are members of your client. They'll hold various responsibilities and various professional titles, but they will be interacting with you as if you are a penetration testing firm and they are your customer or your client. So as you move through this, treat them like you would a client. Interact with them as if it's not a competition, but if it's an engagement that they are paying you to perform. Because of that, we do also expect all of the professional courtesies. But remember, you are working for a customer. You are not competing. So we'll have various channels for you to interact with the customer. Email, as we mentioned, the ticketing system will have the ability to interact in character as well as out of character, and we will clearly delineate which is which. And then there may also be some telephone calls or some video chats that may come up during the competition as well. In general, let the volunteer, the CPTC person, set the pace on whether it's in character or out of character, because we will actually step out of character. We will make sure you know, and we will provide you some feedback on what is happening. And we will call that out very specifically by saying something like, okay, I'm going to go out of character for a minute. Let me give you some thoughts. And then we'll come right back into character. When we're in person physically, we'll actually literally take a step very often. This time, we'll just have to communicate it directly. But if you need to do that as well, please do the same. However, that should be very, very rare. You should have almost all of your interaction in character with the customer.
Exactly. And most often, if someone is going to have a conversation with you, assume it is in character, and you should not be making the decision about switching in or out of character. Let that be done by the volunteer or the employee.
So let's talk a little bit about who the client is this year. So this year we are Next Generation Power, Electric, and Water, or NGPEW. And NGPEW is a different type of organization. So let's talk through a little bit about what they are. We are a power company servicing Smallville and some of the surrounding areas. We actually recently got a really nice donation from LexCorp that's giving us the ability to modernize a lot of equipment. And we have a lot of things that have been aging. So one of the things we also know is because of NERC-CIP compliance, we need to do this test. The organization is committed to providing power and water to the people. Because yes, we do also provide other utilities for Smallville. There's a power generation facility in a dam that we use both for water processing and for electric, as well as a nuclear power plant that are both involved both with our local grid as well as connected to the broader grid as well. We do an annual audit, we do it internally, and we do include cybersecurity around that. But for the most part, we also need to get this done externally, and that is why NGPEW is hiring an external firm. There are also multiple microgrids internally. There are critical customers like a municipal hospital, the dam itself, and other organizations. So as you're doing your testing, you really need to make sure that you keep that in mind. So to kind of expand upon that, and we are staying out of character here as well, even though we did use we on that prior slide. NGPEW is going to be sending a non-disclosure agreement to the coaches and captains of each team. All team members are going to be requested to complete and return that with their various vendor onboarding documentation. So as we've mentioned several times, protect your data as you would, or protect the client's data as you would your own. Be professional with it. Think about what you're going to take before you just start downloading things. Now, our goal here is to increase the realism and set some expectations with you. This is not a legally binding document, but we do consider it binding with regard to the rules and the score. So people that are in breach of an NDA, just like if I was at my professional job, there would be consequences for that. So there will be scoring consequences as well. So please read through it, think about it, and kind of internalize it. But realistically, it's more about making the decisions of what you're doing with the client's data.
And next, let's talk a little bit about the reporting requirements. And really, this is your opportunity to share your expertise and your knowledge with the client. And it's really the lasting impression that you leave with the client beyond the interactions that you have. So the physical manifestation of all the work that you've done for this test is what you deliver in a report. And for this year, we're going to continue requirements that we instituted last year and require that all deliverables be NGPEW branded. And we don't want you to identify your school by your school name or anything other than the team number and region, such as this example of Western-1. So I know a lot of teams like to come up with their own consulting firm name. We don't want you to have that in there as well, or your institution name or your school name. Anyone that looks at a report should have no idea by looking at it what school actually produced the report. The reason that we're doing that is for fairness. There are schools that have reputations for doing very well in this event, and our concern is that that may bias some of our scorers, and we don't want to have that happen. So it's really important that every team produces a report that it's impossible for someone else to know just on the design of the report or how it's laid out or by the phrasing what school produced the report. And that really helps us have a more level playing field for everyone that participates. Additionally, one of the questions that we get a lot is, what does a good report look like? One of the initiatives we took with last year's data and last year's reports is to make that all available. We really want to be as transparent as possible. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, we really want to focus on education. So the only way that we can make you better is to give you examples of reports that have done well and reports that were scored and actually part of the competition in previous years. So this GitHub link here has a copy of every single report that was part of the international finals back in 2019. These reports are from the teams that finished first to the teams that scored a little bit less than first. So all of those reports are there. They are completely anonymized, and they are not in any specific order. But we encourage you to go through those reports, look at them, decide what was communicated well and what could be communicated differently, and use that as a learning example for what other teams have submitted as reports in the past. And finally, we want to share some lessons that we've learned and some recommendations for succeeding in this event. And Lucas and I have been putting this together this is our 6th year together building this event. And obviously, we've all learned building this event, and we see students learn and evolve as they go through this as well. And we encourage you to take those lessons and continue to apply them as you compete. So let's first talk a little bit about what to expect in the actual environment that you're going to get. Well, this is not a CTF. And if you think of this event as, I just need to find a couple of important findings, or I need to get domain admin, and that's all I need to do to win, you're not going to do well. So understand that there are a bunch of attack paths that exist, and you are actually doing a test against a utility. In terms of number of vulnerabilities, what do we say, Lucas? There's hundreds, right?
We don't know, but we think there's hundreds.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We do not design the environment to be the most secure environment ever. So there will be vulnerabilities that are easy to find and vulnerabilities that may not exist as publicly disclosed right now because they might be discovered by you. And that has historically happened in this event.
So one thing, I guess a couple of things actually here to add is when you're doing a pen test of a client, you don't know what the organization looks like. You don't know what's there. And we try and take the same approach as we build the environment for CPTC. So we try and build a company environment. We try and make it as realistic as possible, but it is certainly smaller, just given the volunteer hours and other things that we put into this. So you have a smaller company environment. We build it knowing that you typically have much less time to do this, a day, compared to professionally when you will have at least a week, if not more, to do the test. So we build these environments to be very insecure. But we do not expect you to start finding 0 days. In fact, if to echo Tom's comment earlier, if all you do is find 1 or 2 days, you're not going to do very well in the competition. We don't know everything that's in the environment, and you won't find everything that's in the environment. So look for issues that have a significance to the business itself. Things that relate to regulation, things that cause an exposure of significant or important data, things that allow broad access to the environment. Those are the things that are important that you need to look for and work on. Because treating this like a CTF will not fare well for the competition, just like treating a professional pen test will miss a lot of important things to the organization. So your targets aren't always clearly marked. You have to do your own discovery. You have to find things, but you won't find everything.
And just to further kind of emphasize some of the aspects, there are different things in the environment that can be considered vulnerabilities that you may not necessarily think are like a vulnerability in the sense of like a actual software issue that needs to be patched. Findings can be way more than just that. So something like credentials that are stored insecurely, that's absolutely a finding that you should include.
So let's take a couple of final thoughts here as well. We've mentioned this several times, but it is a competition, but if you think of it like a competition, you will not perform well. And the teams that do well at this year over year, from our experience, are the ones that look at this like a penetration test. They act professionally, they talk in character, and they look to improve the client's environment by finding issues that are important to the business. But there's a couple of other key things here. If you take something down, you are going to be held responsible. Just like if I'm working at an organization during the week and I take something down, the client's going to be upset. So minimize the risk to the client as well. If you're doing the test and you crash half of their systems, they're going to be upset, and you frankly probably made them worse off than they were when you started. That's not our goal as consultants, right? We want to improve our clients. So Next Gen Power is a utility. Lives could potentially be on the line if this were a real organization. So in character, people will be acting like they are, and you need to treat it with the same respect. You need to consider your scope. Sometimes clients with fragile systems will pull things out of scope, and so will not want you testing them because they know of issues. So be considerate of the client's environment, especially in utilities, but in organizations across the world. There are fragile systems. There are things that will crash and have problems depending on how you interact with them. Be aware of that. If you take something down and you immediately talk to the client, it's much different than if you take something down and bring it back up yourself and hope no one notices. Even better if you think you might take something down and you ask for permission. I've never had a client that wasn't willing to work with us to find a way to test it safely, although it may have not been the way we originally thought or intended. So be proactive in your communication. In this case, asking for permission is almost always better than begging for forgiveness. But from a scoring perspective, if you ask for permission and take something down, it's probably not going to impact you. If you're asking for permission every 10 seconds for something, it will. So you also have to learn about how to balance that and handle risk both in your team and for the client organization.
Yeah, I agree with everything on that slide. And as Lucas said, it's really important to understand that this is a professional engagement and we want you to learn how to be a consultant and how to work with a customer so that you're better prepared in the future when you end up doing that sort of work, regardless of if it's as a pen tester or as another role in cybersecurity. So that takes us to the end of this slide deck. I just want to address a couple last kind of next steps so that everyone's on the same page. You've received this recording with an email that included a proposal and the vendor onboarding documents. Make sure that you get your roster in along with the NDA. And then the following week, we'll have the Dropbox testing and also, or the Jumpbox testing, and also the IP address submission. And then you'll have your competition the weekend that's assigned. So pay attention to our communications. Let us know via the ticketing system if you have questions. And we're really looking forward to having all of you compete and seeing each and every one of you virtually as we navigate through this unprecedented time all together.